now, and I am going to hand over to Julia.
Well, thank you very much, Anna, and it's a real delight to be here at the Northern Real Farming Conference. And thank you to all the organisers who've made this possible. So my name's Julia Aglionby, and I'm Executive Director of the Foundation for Common Land, and really pleased to have you all joining us this evening, and looking forward to having some good conversations about commons. So I've got a great team of people, we've got a panel here to provide input, and this evening is really structured around an exciting new project we've got called Our Common Cause, Our Upland Commons, and we've been working on this topic over the last sort of 8 years, and we were really inspired to do so because commons, particularly in the uplands, there are lots of people who have a lot of views about how the uplands should be managed, and it just seemed that people were working against each other rather than together. And our patron, the Prince of Wales, said, Julia, I'm fed up of hearing all these organisations on the Today programme being rude about each other, and I'm patron of all of them, and why can't you just get them together and sort it all out? So and the trouble is he doesn't forget these things. So the next time I saw him, I hadn't actually sorted it all out by then. So he said, well, what are you doing about it? So anyway, this project was born out of that desire to bring people together and to make sure we move forward working on the areas we do agree on. And we thought, let's look at commons. So that's the area we focused on. We've done a range of projects under this banner over the last 8 years, and in particular we're enormously grateful to the Heritage Fund, so to National Lottery players who have enabled this project. So we've just about to start our delivery phase, £3 million project working in Dartmoor, Shropshire, Yorkshire Dales and Cumbria. And this evening I'm joined by Will Rawling. Will, do you want to give people a wave? Will is the chairman of Kinneside Commoners. He's also the chairman of the Herdwick Sheep Breeders Association. He was chairman of the Farmer Network and is a renowned hill farmer and very well regarded in the Lake District. So we're delighted to have Will with us this evening. Also joined by Rosie Snowden. Rosie, do you want to give a wave? So Rosie works for the Yorkshire Peat Partnership, led by the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, and Rosie is from a farming background, but is very much involved in making peat, improving the functionality and restoring peat in the uplands. A lot of commons are peat, have peat soils, and Rosie was involved in our development phase and working in 3 of our 4 areas on looking at the potential for improving peat, particularly encouraging commoners to get involved directly in that work, and for the general public as well. So we've got some innovative projects Rosie will tell us about. And last but not least, Hannah Field. So Hannah is a PhD student at the University of Cumbria and is particularly interested on bringing together the differing perspectives on the use of commons, and she's doing her PhD on that, and will be able to tell us a bit more about how we can discuss how we can look at collaboration. So what we'd like to do before we begin presenting anything, we just think it's, with these online conferences, we can't chat to our neighbour in quite the same way we would do in a physical conference. So we're going to pop you into little breakout rooms of 3 people, and we'll ask you just to introduce yourselves to each other and maybe just say a little bit about what you'd like to get out of this evening, just for about 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll bring you back to tell you a little bit more about the project, and then we will have some discussion groups as well, again wanting to encourage us, making sure we can learn from your experiences, because this is all something we all have something to contribute about. So Anna, shall we pop people, if anyone's got any queries, please pop them in the chat. You can always put them privately directly to Anna if it's just something techie, and we'll keep an eye on that. But when we go into the breakout rooms, Anna won't be able to see the the chat, will you?
No, but if anyone's stranded, you can message me and I can come find you.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to send you all to rooms now then. See you in 4 minutes.
Hello. I was in breakout room 5.
Okay, do you want to go back there?
I was alone.
Oh, I've just sent someone else to join you. Graham Bell's just joined you.
Thank you. Can I go back?
Yes. Why haven't you shown up? Move to breakout room. That's odd. Sorry, 1 minute. I'm going to try and move you back. Sarah, I'm also going to move you to a room. So move to... Have you been invited to join another room now?
Not yet.
I've just invited you.
Can we start? Oh,
All right, you can use this as a breakout room. Dennis, welcome.
That actually means in terms of what I'm going to be analysing in the research and drawing out of those kind of situations to understand them a bit more, and also for me to start building those relationships within the commons as well. So I'm not just a researcher that's going to dive in and tell people what to do. I want to understand and help if there's challenges, or show where there's actually synergies potentially. So I'm going to be looking at the values that people hold and those relationships. So the relationships between the people, between the commoners and the other stakeholders which are involved, and the values that they individually hold as well, and how they compare, because sometimes, yes, they might be conflicting, but there might also be synergies. And part of those relationships is looking at flows of information. So information, knowledge, resources, are they shared? And if they are shared well enough? Or maybe they're not shared at all. Maybe there's a lack of flow of information. So I'm going to be looking at that as well. And this also impacts the adaptivity of the governance and of the decision making. So if the information isn't getting to the people that need it, how can they adapt their decision making effectively to change according to that situation? So things like climate change and heavy rainfall and drought conditions, is that information filtering through the system in a way that it can actually adapt? And also looking at those multiple knowledge types. So I'll be coming obviously from a research, and I can bring in hopefully some useful ideas from academia and science, but I'm also really valuing the people in the place. They have the knowledge of the landscape, and I won't be able to understand the common unless I can speak with the farmers and the other stakeholders and their lived experiences of that place, to then help them to kind of move forward through these transitions. So in terms of the method, that's called action research. So action research is where you become part of the situation, and you're there to help create positive change potentially, but also to value your participants actually more as co-researchers. And so action research also, it works in cycles. So you might do a cycle of research, learn something, and think, oh, actually, that means my research needs to go in this direction, not this direction. So it's learning from the place and the context that you're working in to then inform the next round of research. So I'll be doing interviews, and I hope to be doing workshops and things. And I'm looking at narrative through this. So looking at how people talk about the common, and what they say and what they tell me about would kind of insinuate that that's what they value and that's what they see as important. And humans, we speak in story. That's how we have conversations. So that's the type of method that I'm going to be using, and that's going to help me to understand those social values. And within ecosystem services, there's been a real focus on money and monetary valuation, which is important and it does need to be taken into account, but there's also these amazing social values that actually mean just as much as the money does. So I'm looking at how that can be taken into account in decision making as well. And I've just got this little diagram to show how different types of knowledge might be brought together and mobilized in decision making. So it's all about, you need to translate it, have that negotiation process, bring the knowledge together, and then apply it in the decision making where it needs to be applied. So supporting that kind of through what I'm looking at. So I'm just going to whiz through and realise I'm nearly on 10 minutes, so I'll try not to get too much more in. But I'm currently doing interviews. I'd rather be going to speak to farmers in person, but unfortunately because of COVID I can't actually do that at the moment, so it has been a bit tricky. But I'm just starting interviews on phone calls at the moment. And yeah, I've spoken about most of that, and hopefully out of it will come some sort of framework or process that we can use for place-based decision making. So I'll stop there. If you have any questions, please just pop them in the chat and we can go through them, or I can answer some of them as we go. If you want to contact me, my Twitter handle is Hannah_the_lakes, and my email address, and I'll put it in the chat at the end of the session as well. So thanks very much, and I'll now hand over to Will, who is a commoner himself. Hopefully Will's there.
Yeah, hello everyone. That's me in my natural environment. That's actually in our own ship, and also the lower images on Kinnyside Common itself. I am a commoner, have been for a considerable number of years. On Kinnyside Common, the most westerly, I think, of all the commons in the Lake District National Park. Only a stone's throw away from Sellafield nuclear plant, and very much on the fringe of the former West Cumbria industrial area of Cleatamua, and also Egremont. So the common is very much a traditional working common. It's 2019 hectares approximately, or 5,000 acres for those of us that haven't yet embraced decimalisation. And it's, as I say, it's a very much a traditional working common, but at the same time, it's obviously very involved in conservation management and improving the natural habitat. So the common has a significant number of rights registered on it, and those rights are actually held by 15 people, I think. We actually have 14 active graziers on Kinnyside, which is quite unusual. Many of them are less active than others, in fairness, but we have a core of around about 8 working commoners, and unusually, again, for Lake District Commons, the majority of those people are actually below the age of 40, which is really quite encouraging for the future of the common. The whole of the common is involved in environmental stewardship, both higher level stewardship and entry level. That was entered into in 2012 following a previous scheme that had run for 10 years prior to that. The common is deemed to be in reasonably good condition, but there's also significant room for improvement according to the conservation organisations. We therefore entered into the scheme on the basis that we would look at nature recovery as well as continuing to sustain the traditional farming systems on the common. And therefore we now have a combined approach to the management of the land. So we rely on the hefting of the sheep, which, as many of you will know, actually reflects the territorial instinct of the sheep. So the common is completely unfenced, apart from areas where we've recently planted some trees. But it's unfenced on the northern and eastern boundaries, so that the sheep could, if they chose to, stray for significant distances, but they don't, because they're actually hefted and they're managed in hefted groups on the common. We have 6 core flocks on the common with other smaller flocks intermingled amongst them. Basically, the northern part of the common is grazed by Swaledale sheep, and the southern part is grazed by the traditional Herdwick. We also have cattle grazing the common as part of our stewardship scheme. These were introduced in 2012 to help to restore some of the grazing on the common to a more, what would be considered to be a more sustainable type of habitat from a conservation management point of view. And we also have quite a significant number of horses grazing the common, which have been around for a while and are actually part of a commercial pony trekking exercise and enterprise on the edge of the common. The majority of the right holders, in fact all of the right holders on the common, hold rights to graze both sheep and cattle. Not all graziers have rights to graze both species, but the majority have rights to graze sheep. All of them have rights to graze sheep, I think, and a few of them have rights to graze cattle as well. When we entered into the stewardship scheme in 2012, we were asked to reduce our stocking levels by around about 40%, so a significant reduction in sheep numbers, but also we were asked to introduce cattle grazing to the common. So it did become a very different management system, but still very much a traditional system based on the core principles of farming in the Lake District and particularly farming on common land. The nature of the common, by virtue of involving quite a lot of different people, does rely very much on collaboration. So gathering the sheep off there very much depends on everyone getting involved and everybody doing their part, and everybody actually signing up to managing the common under the current regime that we have working under the stewardship scheme. So the management of the common has changed significantly as a result of the introduction of the stewardship scheme. Large reductions in sheep numbers, introduction of cattle. We have also been asked to plant around about 75 hectares of woodland creation areas, which we have done, and in order to try and add value to the scrub creation planting, we actually chose to site these areas along the boundaries of the River Calder and Wormgill, or most of them anyway. So it gave us a double hit that we were actually protecting some of the riparian corridor, the river banks, as well as creating scrub. We were very much involved in the selection of these sites, and we actually chose them with a view to not only nature improvement and scrub creation, but also making the task of actually gathering sheep and cattle from the common a little easier by placing the fences that are required to protect the scrub creation in its early stages, by putting them in place so that it helped us with movements of livestock around the common. The common itself is, I would suggest, not exactly typical of Lakeland. It's very typical in its management system, but it is a common of predominantly white grass, so Malena and Nardus are very dominant on the common. We have some heather on the northwestern edge of it, which is improving. And we also have quite the large areas of sphagnum, moss, bog type areas, some of which you'll see identified on the photographs there on the top right hand side of the display. You'll see there's quite a lot of cotton grass on there. One thing that perhaps sets Kinnyside apart from many of the other commons, most commons are in stewardship schemes, but one thing that sets it apart is that part of what we chose to do when we entered into the agreement was, as a group of commoners, was that we would actually be involved in the monitoring of the nature improvement on the common. So we entered into a self-monitoring process alongside Natural England, and also the Woodland Trust. The Woodland Trust have been very involved in the scrub creation areas, and obviously lots of other conservation organisations are quite interested in what we're doing. But the guys on Kinnyside were really quite enthusiastic about learning more about what was required of us to improve nature, to improve the habitat and contribute to nature recovery. So we've actually got 8 metre square quadrats in permanent place out on the fell, and we monitor these twice yearly. So we actually monitor these ourselves as commoners. We have different areas dedicated to us, and each commoner then records any change that they see within those quadrats, and we combine that information and talk about it at our annual general meeting, which is held in November of each year. And from our own point of view, I think we are achieving not only nature improvement on the common, but also perhaps a change in attitude, shall we say, with many of the traditional commoning activities, that we're now looking at the combined product of good agricultural practice, producing high quality, welfare friendly food, but we're also looking at the improvement of the habitat on which that food is produced. So we are hopefully doing things in a way that enhances the common, whilst at the same time producing the traditional products of high quality meat and wool from the common. The common does have a very long history. You'll see on the map there on the bottom part of it where it refers to Town Bank. Tung Hau, we've got Neolithic settlements on there, which I believe are some of the oldest in Cumbria. The whole of the common was at one time part of Copeland Forest, but apparently those settlements on Town Bank there were established in a clearing within Copeland Forest and have been around for quite a long time. And on the bottom left-hand corner of the presentation there, you'll see the small packhorse bridge, which we refer to as Monk's Bridge. Well, we actually call it Matty Ben's Bridge. We name it after the guy who used to own the farm that it accessed. It was called Matthew Ben. So, but we call it Matty Ben's Bridge. It's actually called Monk's Bridge. That bridge was actually established by the monks of Calder Abbey in order to access some of the land, which is actually an island. Some of the land that I actually farm. Some of the land that's an island within the common, which was originally a grange of Calder Abbey. So there's been farming activity in and around this area for thousands of years, and it has carried on very much the same way as it is it's being practiced today. I'm getting towards the end of my time, but because of Kinnyside's location, we're not necessarily right in the heart of the honeypot tourist areas, but we do get quite a lot of recreational activity from our immediate neighbours on the western coastal strip. We are seeing an increase in general tourism, but we're not necessarily one of the areas that is suffering too badly as a result of perhaps being over-exploited for tourism purposes. So I think that kind of sums up what we're doing. But the key message out of this, which Hannah touched on earlier, I think, is the collaborative approach to it. And it's this integrated approach that actually embraces traditional management of these very valuable areas, whilst at the same time embracing the need for nature recovery, public good management, and general recreational use, general access. So I think Kinnyside perhaps is a little bit further down the road than many commons in embracing all those elements of land management. And I do feel that because of the young nature of all the people that are involved with it, that Kinnyside does have quite a bright future, depending on how the economics of farm management progress in the changing environment that we live in. But in principle, Kinnyside should be a good example for people to follow for many years to come. Okay, I think I'll leave it there. Have I done my 10 minutes, guys? If anyone has any questions, perhaps put them in the chat room and we'll try and talk to them later, look at them later, yeah.
Well, brilliant. Thank you very much, Will. And it's so good to have you with us. This is, some people may know, this is a really busy time for sheep sales, and anyone who follows Herdy Shepherd on Twitter will know that it's a really lots of tup sales and lots of things going on at the moment. So we're enormously appreciative to Will of giving up the time this evening. I'd very quickly, because we're running a little bit over, and you've heard enough from me already, I'm just going to skip through the sort of third theme, which is commons for all. And this is I'm not going to skip through it, not because it's not important, but you do feel free to ask questions. But this is all about ensuring that everyone understands commons better, and we all understand all the perspectives of commons. So for instance, someone's already asked in the chat, are we looking at alternatives approaches and how different people view commons? And yes, we are. So we've got here a couple of pictures around going out, learning about butterflies and moths on Shropshire Commons. So we're sessions learning about the habitat, and these are local communities being taken out by our facilitator on Clee Liberty Common, working with butterfly conservation there. Then on the right hand side, we've got pictures of school children who are participating in the John Muir Award. So this is a certificate that people can work towards, a bit like, it has 4 elements, a bit like a Duke of Edinburgh Award, but it's around learning about wild places. So people, they learn, they explore, they do some conservation, and they share what they've learned. So this is Tom and Brian Lloyd, who are farmers, again, in Shropshire, and they're very much engaging local school children with learning about the management of sheep. So we can move on to the next slide, please. And we'll be building up, we've been testing these activities during development, and there's some work done with one of the schools near Wills, and there's also one of the commoners on Wills Common is very involved in working with school children as well. And through our development phase, we've been producing resources, and we will not only be encouraging town kids and people from towns to come to commons, but also taking the commons to towns. So maybe, taking a trailer with sheep, with and commoners going into, say, down to Barrow, talking to school children there, enabling us to really connect people with place, learn about both the farming systems and the nature that exists there, and the importance of these upland commons for management of water, management of carbon. So we produced a resource guide there. These will be available for school teachers. They're online free resources available. Could we, next slide. And again, there are a lot of people, we know, 20 million people who come to the lakes, millions of people who come to the Yorkshire Dales, in the Shropshire Hills. The car park there often has to be closed because it's Longmynd is so heavily visited. But we want to make sure when people go to these places that they have meaningful interaction with the landscape. So rather than just thinking this is a hill, they understand how it is managed, they understand what they're looking at, what they're passing, and we'll be using we'll be creating downloadable resources for people to follow as they will go on trails, trail guides that take them through walks, and producing documentation for them. So that's we'll be having those available, creating those and testing them, and then making them freely available to people. So moving on to the slide, we're again with young people. It's about exploring our common land together. So resources that can be used in information centres, that can be used in learning centres, and these can be whether commoners are running sessions on their farms, whether for school kids, whether they're in National Trust visitor centres. So we're really bringing together, not separating farming and conservation, but bringing it all together so people understand what we're doing, and what commoners are doing and what commons can offer. So lots of different ways we're exploring of engaging people. So many people, they don't understand that commons are privately owned land, which are over which farmers have rights of common. They think they're just owned by the state and it's just a sort of blob. That's very much not the case. These are highly managed landscapes. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So the other area that I've mentioned already is about the archaeology, and there's a lot of archaeology on the left-hand side. We have a picture from Derwent Fells, which is one of our case study commons, a huge amount of archaeology there, and want to be able to provide that interpretation so people who are coming there understand, the mining history in many cases. It's very important also on Grassington Common on the right-hand side in the Yorkshire Dales. Why is it you have these features in the landscape? Understanding that were thousands of people who made a living from mining in these areas, and often what we see is artifacts left over from that mining. So as you can see, we're covering a huge range, our sort of Commons for All, a huge range of activities, and we're very keen to connect people with the places that they enjoy and love, and they can understand them better and have come home knowing that their taxes in terms of managing these areas are being well spent looking after important places that are part of all our heritage. So I think that's now I'd like to hand over to Rosie from the Yorkshire Peat Partnership, who's going to tell us a bit about particularly focusing on peat, but looking for how we can secure commons for tomorrow.
Thank you, Julia. Hi, I'm Rosie, work for Yorkshire Peat Partnership, and did some work in the development phase for our common cause. Can we have the next slide? Sorry, I can't see myself, which is quite distracting. So we've talked about the 4 themes for the Our Common Cause project, and peat restoration fits quite nicely into all 4 of these. So by very definition, peat restoration is a collaborative process due to the number of different stakeholders involved in the land that we work on, which is often commons, so lots of different people involved. So resilience, restoring peatland, is making the whole common or moorland or fell more resilient to climate change, flooding, wildfire, making populations of plants and animals more resilient too. And then commons for all, so most upland commons will have peat of some shape or size, which means that the condition affects everyone living and working or connected to that common. And then the one that I'm going to be focusing on, commons for tomorrow, restoring peatlands on commons secures long-term management of common land and the benefits they provide. So there's lots of things that peatland restoration and a healthy peatland can do for the people in the area. Next slide, please. So briefly, for those who don't know much about peatlands, a healthy peat bog is a climax community. It's waterlogged. Its key species is sphagnum moss, which Will has already mentioned. The waterlogged feature makes it acidic, which then leads to plant breakdown being very, very slow, which leads to the buildup of peat. These habitats support whole hosts of insects, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, etc. And it's because of how the plant material decays or not, that's how the carbon is stored, and it's a huge carbon sequestration facility. Peatlands store 3 times more carbon than forests, so really important when we're faced with this climate crisis. And when they are drained or overmanaged, and they actually have the opposite effect of releasing carbon. And similarly with all these benefits, in a damaged condition, they have the opposite effect. So it's doubly important that we get these into good condition. So briefly, water quality, degraded peatlands release dissolved and particulate carbon. This costs water companies loads of money to remove, which is passed on to the everyone that uses the water. We've got consequences of flooding downstream in degraded landscapes. So like the sorts of things that Julia was talking about. With a healthy peat bog, the risk and the flood peak is reduced. That's because of the surface roughness of the vegetation that's there. It slows down the runoff, leading to higher lag times and a lower flood peak. So really important there. And then there's the recreation, which Julie's also mentioned. Wild spaces, green spaces, places to breathe, really important now. And a degraded wasteland is not necessarily a place that people are going to come to. This has a knock-on effect on the local economy. Visitors to the area are going to be visiting local cafes and pubs and everything. And also there's the potential to explore more ecotourism. So lots of options for benefiting the local economy. And then also the historic environment is often interlinked with peatlands. So they're often intertwined. So restoring the peat can often stabilize the archaeological features as well. Next slide. So how can a healthy peatland help a local farm business? The UK is leaving the Common Agricultural Policy. This is going to force change, and hopefully it's going to be replaced by a scheme that is going to lead to long-term sustainable management with benefits for both the farmer, biodiversity and the climate. But it will need to work with the existing knowledge of the land managers and people that live there. And we all know about the failings of past schemes, so there is a lot riding on elms and the opportunities that it could bring. So it will hopefully enable a more targeted approach to land management, whereby land that isn't productive, for example, some areas of sheep grazing on, for example, blanket bog, could potentially be taken out and a different payment given for that area. So all of those benefits that I've just talked about, the farmer could be paid for those instead of grazing potentially unsuitable areas, and then maximising productivity on the areas where they can produce more food. It will hopefully lead to a new ideology and new opportunities in the uplands, which will be a win-win for the farmer and the environment. Next slide, please. So just quickly go through some of these potential opportunities, some that I suggested through the Our Common Cause project, some that YPP are working on, and hopefully that ELMS could support. We would hope that in all cases it would be a process of shared learning, where conservation organisations work with land managers to achieve joint goals, these multiple outcomes that Julia was talking about. So, for example, on the areas I mentioned before where you might take off livestock and leave with little or no management, could look at things like ecotourism. So I was on a peatland recently where they had beautifully set up boardwalks between grouse butts, which were over these beautiful sphagnum lawns, which could easily be transferred or used simultaneously for ecotourism. I saw wonderful raptors, all kinds of birds, and interesting wildlife up there. So that could be one option. We've got different kinds of hunting that are more sustainable, so potentially more of a stalk and shoot method. Concepts such as carbon farmer, or potentially, if the bog is in good enough condition, the potential to harvest and sell sphagnum to other restoration projects. So we're really excited about these projects where the healthy peat bog can provide alternative income streams for farmers. For example, another one might be looking at growing plug plants, and also Yorkshire Peat Partnership are looking at trials to use sheep wool in restoration projects. So that might be a product that doesn't get much money potentially anymore, so giving it a market value again. So we need to find ways to support farmers to continue to manage the uplands, and this will mean some diversification, but this can absolutely be beneficial for farm businesses and the environment. And you could end up with a near natural peat bog providing a whole host of services and bringing money through tourism or some other things that I mentioned, whilst maintaining the traditional farming practices, potentially in a more targeted way. There's also the potential for carbon trading through the peatland codes. Talk to me later about that if you like. So through delivering these practical improvements to habitat, we can improve the economy, the environment, and the social aspects of commoning and the connected areas. And I think the last slide is just a picture of hopefully what we're working on peat bogs like this to turn it into peat bogs on the right. Thank you very much. Sorry if I ran over.
Not at all, thank you, Rosie. It's really good. I hope everybody's enjoyed seeing the range of what commons are and the work that we'll be undertaking over the next 3 years. So we're really excited to have this opportunity to do this project, and having such a large partnership of people who put in funds towards that. I should add, I did put it in the chat, someone had asked about the National Trust. So the National Trust are heavily involved, and they are the accountable body. They co-hold the grant with us from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And if I haven't mentioned already or you've missed it, we just say we are very thankful to everybody who plays the lottery, because without that, these projects would not be possible. In terms of what we'd like to do now, it's now a chance for you to engage with this, and we're going to we're going to move into some breakout rooms. I don't know whether
should we take the questions?
Yeah, well, I was going to say we could take some questions first, but we will then move you into some breakout rooms. So these are sort of specific questions to the speakers, Anna, aren't they, at this stage?
Yeah, and I'm not sure we might have some time for breakout rooms, but we're coming up to 9.
Time. Yeah,
so there's a number of questions for Will that I'm going to take first, and then I'll go to the more juicy one last. So, Will, was the decision to introduce cattle to Kinniside a hard one to get consensus agreement amongst the commoners? And how has it worked for both the commoners and Natural England?
The decision to introduce cattle was quite well received by the general group of commoners. Not everyone has rights to graze cattle, so it was restricted to those that had, which excluded possibly 5 or 6 of us. I personally don't have any rights to graze cattle on Kinniside Common, neither does my son. We're involved in the same business, obviously. But no, people were generally quite keen to try grazing cattle on there, and in fairness, the cattle have done really well from a farming point of view, and we're really quite pleased with the improvement that they're delivering in terms of nature recovery. Natural England have not really commented in any major way about whether they think the cattle are doing a good job or not, but in fairness, Natural England haven't commented very much about anything, so I don't want to sound cynical about that, but I am. Yeah.
And are the commoners able to finish lambs and cattle off on Kinniside itself, or do they have to be brought off for final feeding?
No, the majority of that there aren't any cattle necessarily being with calves on. Well, there's one group would have calves on the fell, but the majority are just young cattle that don't actually have calves with them. But obviously, a lot of the lambs bred on common land, because the flocks are hefted. Pretty much all the female lambs that are bred out on the common are retained for breeding purposes themselves. They become ewes and replace ewes, leaving the flock because they're getting too old. They're replaced by lambs that have been bred from that flock. So it's important that we retain that self-replacing flock system in order to manage the hefting. Hefting is getting quite fragile, actually, and it's something we need to be very careful about. But the lambs that the castrated males, which we refer to as wethers, which come off the common, are usually quite small. They're fell-bred, predominantly Herdwick and Swaledale, and they will be finished on better quality grass on the attached land surrounding the common. That has the farms surrounding the common have rights appurtenant, which mean they can only graze the common because they have rights attached to their farm which allow them to do so. So the majority of those lambs will be finished either on grass on the right holding farms or on grass that's rented in order to finish them. The majority will be finished from grass, but not very, very few will be sufficiently well fed to market directly off the common. Quite a number of them, in fairness, quite a number of them will be sold on to other farmers for further feeding. They'll be sold what we refer to as store, which means they go to someone else for further feeding.
Okay, great. And another, you have quite a few questions, so I'm going to go through all of them and then I'll move to someone else. There's a question around TB testing. So how often do you have to test, and do you have to keep cattle apart on the common?
There's no requirement to keep cattle apart on the common. The whole area is in what referred to as a 2B4, which means all cattle are routinely tested every 4 years. We're fortunate that we're in an area where TB is not particularly not a particular problem. We're obviously very cautious about not just TB, but other infectious diseases that might be transferred by the cattle on the common and the sheep for that matter. But in general, there's little or no issue around TB in particular and any other health issues in general. The cattle come off the common in really pretty good health, very good health, in fact. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that. And the last question is around the monitoring. So do you think it's made a big difference to be able to be involved in the monitoring of the common? And how easy was it to get all the commoners involved?
The self-monitoring on the common, I think, is a huge step forward. I think it really generates ownership within the commoners group, because there's a degree of interest, a lot of interest in how the plant life is actually progressing. I must admit it was really quite difficult to encourage the commoners to actually consider self-monitoring some of the land themselves. And not all of them are involved in it, to be perfectly honest. But those that are really quite enthusiastic about it now. They've become sort of local experts, if you would. They're very, very interested in what the fauna and flora is delivering on the common, particularly the flora. And in many cases, the people involved have actually done their own research to get themselves a little bit more informed and upskilled about how we can continue with the monitoring on the common. Yeah. To sum it up, it's been a really useful and positive exercise. Although at the outset it was quite difficult to encourage people to get involved, but now they are involved. They're really engaged with it, and I think it generates a little bit of a sense of ownership. So yeah, it's a really good thing. Should happen in all cases.
Ah, that's really good to hear. And then a question was asked early on in the chat when Hannah was speaking, and there was a few responses, but it felt like it was something that should probably get brought up for the wider group. And the questions relates to valuing of the ecosystems that you're working with. So when you're considering social values and the valuing of an ecosystem by people, are you also considering the various features of the landscape and futures of the landscape, and how they might be more valued by other groups outside of the commoner group? For example, the value placed by wider society on a transformed landscape. And I think that was directed at you mainly, Hannah.
That's all right, no worries. Yeah, so values, an interesting concept. So to be kind of clear, it'll be a cross section of the stakeholders that are involved with the common. So that probably, I'm not sure it'll be general public necessarily, maybe a survey, I'm not sure, but it'll include landowners, commoners, but also people, say, from the National Park, Natural England, Cumbria Wildlife Trust maybe, so those other stakeholder bodies as well, some of which will be more, probably their perspective be more focused on those ecosystems and that rather than the farming, and it's looking at how to bring those different views together essentially. Yeah, but there might be other ways in which that comes up, but at the moment I'm focusing on those kind of stakeholder groups. Will, did you want to?
Yeah, just a comment really. I fully understand why you would target those particular groups that you've mentioned there, but I do think that the general public have a major stake in this. When you talk about stakeholders, the general public do have a major stake in common land.
Yeah.
It's an area of recreation, it's an area of natural beauty in most cases, and I do really think as we see increasing use of common land for purposes other than traditional farming and the mineral exploitation and all the other purposes of common land have basically gone, but the traditional farming activity sits alongside tourism now. We need to, I feel it's really important, we need to understand how we can strike a balance between people enjoying the countryside whilst not destroying the countryside. We need to manage the numbers of people that are, this isn't the case on Kinnyside, let me say, but I do know that in many of the commons in the Central Lakes, there is significant tourism pressure that is actually causing all sorts of different difficulties on them. And I do think the general public have got a major stake in all of this, and they should have a voice, I think, but not necessarily only a voice in terms of usage. They need to understand that it isn't necessarily an area where they can do exactly what they want. There has to be some consideration given to the way that the land is managed and the multiple outputs that we're trying to get from this type of land. That's just a comment, not suggesting that should be.
It's really interesting. I think because I've been focusing on those relationships between the people that are more locally involved in the management of the common initially, probably that's where I'm coming from at the moment. But I'm also going to be looking at kind of that regional development, regional focus as well in particular, but obviously the policy that comes through. So I'm not sure. It's really good feedback, and I'm at a place where I can think about these things more. It's just whittling it down to fit it into my scope, I suppose. I know that our Common Cause are obviously looking at Commons for All and the importance of that as well, but in terms of the differing futures we might have, I have looked at maybe using future scenarios and things as well. Yeah, probably a bigger discussion. I won't keep going on, but thank you. Yeah, it's really useful. Good question.
Great. And Rob Mills has a lot of thoughts about this, so maybe there's an option to continue chatting afterwards in one of the breakout rooms. But I do think that summary at the end of the last comment is quite good to just say out loud in case people aren't following. So if we consider only the land owning and land managing stakeholders, we get a very narrow view of how the landscapes are valued. So I'll just leave that there. And I don't have any more questions, so I'll hand back over to Julia.
Thank you very much, Anna. We had hoped to put you into some breakout rooms, but I think our time is, what do we have? We have, we do have till 9 o'clock, Anna, or?
Yeah.
I mean, we could, if people wanted to just have a conversation, because again, and so I think we've said what we would like to say, but I think it is also, we've had lots of comments coming in, and it might be quite nice for people to have an opportunity just to share some of their thoughts. So even if we don't get the feedback, we had a few sort of questions, didn't we, Anna, that we were potentially going to put in the chat. I don't know, Hannah, whether you can cut and paste those into the chat. So we could just have 5 minutes in a breakout room just to have an opportunity to share your thoughts with other people. And you'll be able to see the chat when you're in your breakout room. So we've got, do we want to have, say, 5 groups of 4 or something, Anna?
I've already set them
Okay.
up, so you have 4 groups, some with 4 and some with 5.
Okay, lovely. Well, shall we quickly pop people in? And if you can join, brilliant.
And I've allocated one of you to each group so you can keep notes.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
Right, enjoy.
Lovely.
Will you be joining a group? Okay.
for their participation, for coming along. If you do have any queries, please do get in touch with us, and you can also get in touch via Twitter. So we have a Twitter address which is #4 Common Land, and do email us, and you can. So just want to say big thank you, and it's been really inspiring and hearing your questions. And Anna, will you be able to, we'll save the chat and then we can feed all that into our thinking. I think particularly around, you know, how we engage as wide an audience as possible. But yes, we've been really, you know, really pleased to have your input just as we start this project. We're interviewing for our project manager next week, so it's all go, and then we've got another 6-7 members of staff to recruit, so it's all quite exciting. So I think on that note, we'll say good evening, and you know, I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
And thanks, Anna, for your help.